When a police officer with 22 years on the job turned a corner on Cannery Row in Monterey, California, he expected a normal Tuesday afternoon. He had seen shootings. He had pulled children from burning buildings. He thought nothing could stop him in his tracks anymore. He was wrong, because what he saw on that sidewalk, in the middle of the day, with tourists walking past and seagulls calling over the water, was something so unexpected, so quietly powerful, that he forgot the coffee cup in his hand. It hit the sidewalk and burst open. He did not even look down. He just stared. His partner, a young officer named Delia, walked straight into his back. She started to say something. Then she saw it too. Her hand went to her mouth. She did not speak for a very long time. Later that night, till she sat down to write her daily report, she typed one sentence, deleted it, typed again, deleted it again. She did this 7 times. 7 times she tried to find the words and could not. In the end, all she wrote was this: "Today I saw something I will never forget for the rest of my life." Her boss read that report. He called her into his office. She told him the whole story from the beginning. When she finished, he, a man who had not cried since his dog died years ago, put his hand over his eyes and sat that way for almost a full minute. Then he said quietly, "Nobody's going to believe this." So what did they see? It started simply enough. A homeless man was sitting on his usual spot on the sidewalk near the old fish market. His name was Arlo. He had been living on the streets for 3 years. He had a paper cup in front of him and a worn green army jacket with electrical tape on the shoulder. Just an ordinary man, on an ordinary street, on what looked like an ordinary morning, until a tall, old man in a tan jacket stopped in front of him. The tourist walked right past without looking twice. But Arlo looked up, and his brain could not quite believe what his eyes were telling him. Because the man standing on the sidewalk, looking directly at him, not at the cup, not at the tape on his shoulder, but directly at his face, was one of the most famous people alive. It was Clint Eastwood. And instead of dropping $1 in the cup and walking on, the way every single other person always did, Clint Eastwood did something that nobody on that sidewalk expected. Something that would set off a chain of events so remarkable that a police officer could not find words for it. Something that would reach 200 miles away to a woman sitting alone at a kitchen table who had been praying for this moment for 4 years. Something that would change not one life, but several, forever. What did Clint Eastwood do when he stopped in front of a homeless man on a Monterey sidewalk? Stay with us for the whole story, because what happens next, all of it, every piece of it, is something you need to hear from the beginning to truly understand what it means. And we promise you this: by the time it is over, you will never look at a sidewalk or a stranger on one the same way again. This is the story of Arlo Beckett, and the morning everything changed. His name was Arlo Beckett. Well, most people walked past him the way you walk past a parking meter or a trash can. They knew something was there. They just did not really see it. Arlo had been living on the streets of Monterey, California for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. He knew the exact number because he marked each day with a small pencil line in the back of a notebook he kept tucked inside the lining of his coat. 1 line for each day, 3 years worth of lines, thin as hairs, quiet as breath. The notebook was the last thing he still had from his old life, his real life, the one where he had been a 4th grade teacher at Seaside Elementary School, the one where he had lived in a small yellow house with a porch swing that squeaked every time someone sat on it, the one where his daughter Marisol had braided wildflowers into her hair on Sunday mornings and held them up to the light to see which colors the petals were made of. That was a long time ago. Arlo was 54 years old now. His hair was the color of ash. His beard was long and uneven. His coat, a green army jacket he had found folded on top of a donation bin behind the Salvation Army, had a tear on the left shoulder that he had patched with electrical tape. The tape had started to curl at the edges. His boots had no laces. He had pulled the laces out months ago and used them to tie a split piece of plastic bag over a crack in the left sole, so that water would not come in when it rained. The water came in anyway. He was not a drinking man. People assumed he was. Strangers who handed him $1 sometimes gave him a look that said, "I know what you'll spend this on." He did not correct them. Correcting strangers cost energy he did not always have. The truth was that he had not had a drink in 9 years. He had lost his house and his classroom and his marriage, and eventually the sound of his daughter's voice on a phone. Not because of drinking, but because of something quieter and harder to put words to. A sadness so heavy it had pushed him down, step by step, the way water pushes down a path. Until one day he looked up and found that the floor of his life had become the sidewalk. But there were things people did not know about Arlo Beckett. Things they would never guess if they walked past him every day for a year. He still read books. Every single week, without fail. He walked 14 blocks to the Monterey Public Library, went to a table in the far back corner where it was quiet and warm, and he read for 4 hours. He had read 112 books in the 3 years he had been on the street. He kept a careful list of every one of them in the notebook, with a line or two of notes beside each title. What it made him think about, what it got right, what it got wrong. He still said please and thank you, always to everyone. Not as a strategy to get more money in his cup, just because it was right. It had always been right. His mother had told him that manners were not about being soft. They were about being honest. You said please because you meant it. You said thank you because you were glad. He still noticed beautiful things. The way morning light hit the surface of the bay and turned it from gray to blue. The smell of sourdough drifting from the bakery on Alvarado Street at 5 in the morning when the city was still sleeping. The sound of seabirds in the dark calling back and forth to each other the way people talk when they think no one else can hear. On the morning of October 14th, a Tuesday, Arlo Beckett was sitting on his usual stretch of sidewalk near the old fish market on Cannery Row. A paper cup sat on the concrete in front of him. The sun was low and gold, just clearing the buildings to the east. The air smelled like salt and something frying nearby. Bacon, maybe, or potatoes. It was, despite everything, a beautiful morning. He was not watching the people who walked past. He had learned over 3 years not to look directly at them. When you looked at people directly, they got uncomfortable. They walked faster. They looked at their phones more intensely, like the phone was suddenly very urgent. So Arlo kept his eyes a little to the side. At the ground, at the glint of water at the end of the street, at the particular way pigeons walked, which had always seemed to him like they were listening for something underground. He let people move in and out of the edge of his vision like clouds passing. There and gone. There and gone. That is why he did not notice at first that someone had stopped in front of him. He saw boots, nice ones, brown leather, the kind that had been cared for over many years. Then he looked up. The man was tall. He was old, very old, but he stood the way a young man stands, straight and solid and not apologizing for taking up space. Like a tree that has been through enough storms to know it doesn't need to lean. He wore a simple tan jacket, no logos, no fuss. His face was a face that Arlo's eyes knew before his brain did, the way you recognize a song before you remember its name. The man did not look at the paper cup. He did not look at the tape on Arlo's shoulder, or the boots without laces, or the beard, or the jacket that was too thin for October. He looked at Arlo's face, directly, calmly, the way a person looks at another person when they actually want to see them. "Good morning," the man said. His voice was low and even, like a radio turned down to just the right volume. Arlo blinked. "Good morning," he said. Then his brain caught up with his eyes. A strange feeling moved through him, like the sidewalk had shifted an inch. When he thought, that is not possible. That man looks exactly like... "Cold out this morning," the man said. "Little bit," Arlo said carefully. The man looked up the street, then back at Arlo. He put both hands in his jacket pockets. He did not seem to be in a hurry. All around them, tourists moved along the sidewalk looking at their phones, looking at the water, looking at the old cannery buildings with their painted signs. Not one of them glanced twice at the tall old man standing quietly talking to the man with the paper cup. The world moved around them like a river moving around two stones. Arlo figured the only thing to do was ask it straight. He had learned on the streets that straight questions were kinder than going around. "Are you," he started. "Clint Eastwood," the man said, flat and simple. And not like he was showing off, just like it was a fact about the world, the same as saying the sky was blue or the bay was cold. Arlo nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. Clint Eastwood nodded back. Okay, he said. And then, instead of reaching into his pocket for a dollar bill and bending down to drop it in the cup and straightening up and walking on, which is what every other person did, which is the whole script that Arlo knew by heart, Clint Eastwood sat down on the sidewalk, right there, next to Arlo, on the cold concrete of Cannery Row. Arlo stared at him. The most famous actor in the history of Western movies sat against the old brick wall with his long legs out in front of him, like he had sat on 1,000 sidewalks, like this was nothing unusual at all. He leaned his head back against the brick when he looked up the street toward the water. Then he turned and looked at Arlo with those calm, direct eyes that had stared down villains on 100 movie screens. So, said Clint Eastwood, what's your name? Arlo, he said. Arlo Beckett. Clint nodded once, slowly, the way a person nods when they are storing something away carefully. Good name, and he said, my mother thought so. A small smile moved across Clint's face, just at the corner of his mouth. Then it settled back into calm. A pigeon waddled past both of them, close enough to touch, completely unimpressed by either one. Two teenagers on bicycles came rattling down the sidewalk, ringing their bells at each other and laughing. A woman with a baby stroller slowed down when she saw the two men sitting against the wall. She looked at Arlo first, either the way most people did, as if checking what kind of situation she was walking into. Then she saw Clint. Her expression went through 4 different things in about 2 seconds. She looked away. She looked back once more. Then she pushed the stroller on without saying a word, her neck a little stiff, like she was telling herself she had not just seen what she had just seen. Clint did not seem to notice, or if he noticed, he did not care. You from Monterey originally? He asked. Fresno, Arlo said. Been here about 3 years. I've been down in Carmel 40 years, Clint said. He looked out toward the end of the street, where the bay sat flat and wide and quietly beautiful. Never gets old. The light here is different from anywhere else I've ever been, morning especially. Arlo looked at the water too. The sun was higher now than when the morning had started. The bay was shifting from its early gray into a pale, clear blue, the kind that looked almost warm, even though it was not. Yeah, he said. I know what you mean. He paused. I write it down sometimes. The light, what it looks like on different days. Clint turned his head and looked at Arlo. It was not the look of someone surprised. It was the look of someone whose interest has just sharpened, focused in, the way a bird focuses when something in the grass moves. You write? He said. I keep a notebook. Arlo glanced down at the front pocket of his coat. The corner of the black notebook stuck up just above the opening, the way it always did. Nothing fancy, just things I notice. Light on the water, people walking by. Is sometimes a sentence or two about a book I read. Clint was quiet for a moment, then he said, That's the whole job. Arlo looked at him. What job? Any of it, Clint said. Writing, directing, acting, the whole thing. When you strip it down to what it actually is, it's just noticing. Paying attention to what is real and putting it somewhere so other people can see it too. He looked at the notebook corner sticking out of Arlo's pocket. Sounds like you already know how to do that. Arlo did not know what to say to that. He was not used to being told he knew how to do something. He was much more used to the quiet understanding that he had gotten most things wrong. He looked at the street. I used to teach, he said. 4th grade, Seaside Elementary. What happened? Nobody ever asked that, not directly. The people who noticed Arlo at all, which was not many, sometimes asked where he was from, sometimes asked how long he had been on the street, sometimes asked in a careful, sideways way if he was doing okay. But nobody ever looked at him and said, What happened? Like the question was simple, like it deserved a real answer instead of a polite one. Something in Arlo's chest loosened, just a little, the way a knot loosens when you stop pulling against it and just let it be for a second. Lost my way, he said. Not all at once. A little at a time. I couldn't seem to stop it while it was happening. By the time I knew how far down I'd gone, I didn't know how to climb back. Clint looked at the street. He picked up a small gray pebble from the sidewalk and turned it over in his fingers, not looking at it, just holding it. Can I know about that? He said quietly. The little at a time part. He set the pebble down. It's the worst kind. The big disasters, those you can point to. Everybody can see them. The little ones are invisible until they're not. Arlo looked at him. He wanted to ask what Clint meant by that. He did not ask. He understood that some things are offered as company, not as explanation. This was company. He accepted it. They sat in silence for a little while. It was not the uncomfortable kind of silence, not the kind that forms when two people have run out of things to say and are both waiting for a reason to leave. It was the other kind, the kind that forms between people who have both been through enough that they know silence is not empty. Sometimes it is the fullest thing in the room. When a fishing boat moved slowly across the far end of the bay, a gull cried once and then went quiet. "You have family?" Clint asked. Arlo breathed in, slow. "A daughter," he said. "Her name is Marisol. She's 26, lives up in San Jose." He looked at the notebook in his pocket. He looked away. "We don't talk much. We don't really talk at all, to be honest." Clint nodded. He did not say, "I'm sorry." Arlo noticed that immediately. Most people said "I'm sorry" automatically, the way they said Gesundheit after a sneeze. It came out before they had even thought about it. Clint just nodded, the way you nod when you receive something and treat it carefully, as a real thing, not a prompt for a reflex. "I made mistakes with my family too," Clint said after a moment. "Different kind than yours, maybe. But I don't know that different kinds of mistakes feel all that different from the inside." Arlo looked at him. This man, 90-some years old, one of the most famous human beings on earth, sitting on a cold sidewalk, talking about his mistakes the way a person talks about them when they have had enough time to look at them honestly. Arlo felt something happen in his eyes, a pressure, hot and fast. He blinked. He looked out at the water. "Why did you sit down?" Arlo asked. His voice was even. He was proud of that. "People don't usually sit down." Clint thought about the question. He did not answer right away, which Arlo respected. Quick answers to real questions are often just noise. "I walk this street a couple times a month," Clint said. "Morning, usually. I've seen you here before." "A number of times." Arlo turned to look at him. "You have?" Clint looked at the paper cup sitting on the sidewalk in front of them. Empty now, slightly tilted where the concrete was uneven. "I noticed something. When people drop money in your cup, and not everyone does, you say thank you, out loud, clearly, like you actually mean it, not like a habit, like you chose to say it every time." Arlo opened his mouth. He closed it again. He had not known anyone was paying attention to that. "I almost stopped 3 or 4 other times," Clint said, "but I was always walking somewhere. Today I just decided that the somewhere could wait." "I'm glad you stopped," Arlo said. He meant it completely. He was not being polite. It was the simple truth. "I'm really glad you stopped." Clint looked at him. He nodded once. He understood the difference between polite and true. "Good, Ian," he said. They talked after that. They talked the way two people talk when neither one of them is performing for the other. Easily, with pauses where pauses belonged and words where words were needed. They talked about Monterey and about teaching. Arlo told him that the best day he ever had in a classroom was the day a boy named Freddie, who had not read a single page out loud all year without shutting down, raised his hand and read an entire paragraph from a library book without stopping once, and then looked up at the class with an expression that Arlo said he would see for the rest of his life. Clint listened to that story without interrupting. When it was over, he said, "Wash, that's worth more than most things." They talked about The Old Man and the Sea. Arlo said he had read it 6 times, and each time found something he had missed before. Clint said he had read it twice and believed Arlo completely about the something new. They talked about the sea lions on the municipal wharf, the ones that barked and flopped and smelled terrible and drew enormous crowds of people every single day. "The loudest free entertainment in California," Arlo said. Clint laughed. It was a low, real laugh. Not the kind a person produces to be friendly, but the kind that comes up on its own because something was actually funny, a genuine sound. Arlo felt it land somewhere warm. This is when Officer Delia Rush and her partner came around the corner. Officer Rush was 29 years old and had been with the Monterey Police Department for 4 years. She was from Salinas, half an hour south, and she was good at her job in the specific way that quiet, observant people are good at it. She noticed things. She stayed calm, and she did not assume she already knew what she was looking at before she had actually looked. Her father had made her watch Gran Torino when she was 17, and then again when she was 22, and told her both times that it was the most honest movie he had ever seen. She had watched it 6 more times on her own since then. She could quote most of it. She recognized Clint Eastwood the instant she came around the corner. She grabbed her partner's arm. Her partner, Officer Terrence Fold, was holding a coffee cup. He startled. A hot coffee went over his hand and dripped onto the sidewalk. He made a noise. "What are you?" he started. She did not answer. She was staring. On the sidewalk against the old brick wall of the fish market, Clint Eastwood and a homeless man sat side by side, their legs out in front of them, talking the way old friends talk when they have not seen each other in a while and have a lot of ground to cover. Officer Fold looked at where she was looking. He stared too. "Is that?" he whispered. "Yes," she whispered back. "What is he doing?" "I don't know." Her voice was very quiet now. "Stop talking." She did not approach. Every instinct she had, the professional ones, the human ones, and all of them together, told her that walking up to this right now would be like walking into a room where something fragile was balanced near the edge. You did not do it. You stood still. You watched. Officer Fold started to speak again. She put one hand out, palm flat, without looking at him. He stopped. They stood at the corner of the street in the October morning, and they watched Clint Eastwood and Arlo Beckett sit on the sidewalk and talk. And what they were about to see, the thing that would leave Officer Rush sitting in front of a blank screen that night, deleting sentence after sentence, unable to find words strong enough to hold what had happened, had not occurred yet. It was still 4 minutes away. 4 minutes. It doesn't sound like very long. But 4 minutes can change the entire direction of a person's life. 4 minutes can open a door that has been closed for 3 years. 4 minutes can turn a sidewalk into the beginning of something. 4 minutes was all it was going to take. It started with the notebook. They had been talking for about 20 minutes when Clint nodded toward the black corner of it, sticking out of Arlo's coat pocket. "You mentioned you write things down," he said. "Would you mind if I looked?" It was not a demand. It was not even quite a request. It was the quiet kind of asking that leaves the door fully open for the other person to say no. Arlo hesitated. Nobody had ever asked to see the notebook, not once in 3 years. People had seen him writing in it. A few had glanced over with mild curiosity, the way you glance at a stranger's crossword puzzle, but nobody had ever asked to hold it. It felt private in the way a person's handwriting feels private, or the way a person's voice sounds different on a recording than it does in real life. Exposed, more honest than you meant to be. But he reached into his pocket and pulled it out. It was small, barely bigger than his palm. The cover was black cardboard with a red elastic band stretched around it to keep it shut. The cover was wrinkled from getting caught in the rain twice. The bottom right corner had gone soft and round from years of being pressed against the same spot inside his coat. He had carried it so long it had taken the shape of him. He held it out. Clint took it the way you take something that belongs to someone else and matters to them. Carefully, one with both hands, not casually. He pulled the elastic band off. He opened it from the front. The first pages were the book list, all 112 titles, written in Arlo's small, neat hand, numbered. Each one followed by a note, not just the title and the author, but a sentence or two about what the book had meant, what it had gotten right, what it had made Arlo think about. Real notes, the kind a teacher writes, the kind a person writes when they take a book seriously and believe it deserves a genuine response. Clint read slowly. His eyes moved down the page without hurrying. Number 47, The Grapes of Wrath. Steinbeck knew what hunger looks like from the inside, not the hunger for food, the deeper kind. Number 83, Educated by Tara Westover. The hardest kind of brave is the kind where you have to become someone your family doesn't recognize. She did it anyway. Number 112, Cannery Row by Steinbeck. I live on this street. I feel him watching. Clint paused on that last one. He read it again. Then he turned the page. Between the book entries, there were other things. Small paragraphs written on whatever space was left, squeezed into margins or tucked at the bottom of pages. Light descriptions. Arlo had been writing them for all 3 years. Small, careful records of what the world looked like on specific mornings. November 3rd, light today came in orange from the wildfire smoke up the valley. The whole bay looked like it was filled with copper pennies. I sat and watched it for a long time. Didn't write anything for almost an hour. Some things take a while before you can put words to them. March 12th. Fog so thick this morning, you couldn't see to the end of the block. The whole world felt like it had shrunk to just this one corner. Just the wall and the sidewalk, and the sound of the water you couldn't see. I didn't mind. Small felt safe today. July 4th. Fireworks over the bay last night. I watched from the end of the wharf. Nobody asked me to leave. A boy about 7 years old stood next to me for the whole show. He never looked at me. We both just watched. It was one of the better nights I can remember. Clint turned pages slowly. There were sketches too, small ones, drawn with whatever pen Arlo had been using at the time, some in blue ink, some in black. A sea lion sprawled on the dock with its neck stretched back. A child standing on a curb with an ice cream cone pointed at the ground, the scoop already fallen. The child's face a perfect circle of stunned grief. A man in a business suit walking very fast with his briefcase, and his eyes pointed straight ahead and his jaw set, looking at nothing and no one. That sketch had a note under it. He looked like a man who had forgotten where he was going, but was too afraid to slow down and find out. Clint almost smiled at that one. Almost. Then he turned to the back of the notebook. He found the letters. There were 5 of them, written on the last few pages, each one begun and crossed out and begun again. The crossing out was heavy in some places, whole lines buried under thick strokes where Arlo had decided the words were wrong and tried to bury them. But you could still see, in the lighter crossings out, what some of the buried words had been. Things like, I understand if you don't want to, and I have no excuse for, and simply in one place just, I miss you. All 5 letters were addressed to Marisol. Clint read the first one. Dear Marisol, I think about calling you every day, every single day, and I know I don't call because I'm afraid. I'm afraid that you have finally found peace with me being gone, and I don't want to reach in and pull that piece apart. If you are okay without me, maybe that is the best thing I can give you, to stay gone. I don't know if that's right. I don't know much anymore. He read the second and the third. They grew slightly shorter each time, like a person who has been trying to fit something into a container that is too small and keeps removing pieces, hoping the essential part will still be there when they are done. The last letter was the shortest. The ink was fresher than the others. He could tell by the color, a little darker, a little sharper on the page. It had been written recently. Dear Marisol, I don't know if I'll ever be brave enough to send you any of these, but I need you to know one thing. Every single thing that went wrong, none of it was because of you. Not one piece of it. You were always the best thing in my life. You still are. Even from here, where you can't see me and I can barely see myself, that is still true. I love you. Dad. Clint read it once. He read it again. Then he closed the notebook. He sat very still for a moment. He looked at the end of the street where the bay moved slowly in the October light. A pelican came in low over the water and landed on a wooden piling, folding its great wings in against its sides with the unhurried dignity of something that has never once doubted it belongs exactly where it is. You need to send that last one, Clint said. His voice was quiet, no drama in it, just the plain weight of something true. Arlo was looking at his hands, which were resting open on his knees. I know, he said. Not someday. She needs to hear it now. I know, Arlo said again. His voice was smaller this time. Fear is a coward, Clint said. He said it the way a person says something they have had to learn the hard way and did not enjoy learning. It tells you it's keeping you safe. It's not. It's keeping you stuck. There's a difference. Arlo's jaw tightened. Something was moving behind his eyes. A pressure building, the kind that comes when a feeling has been held in a closed space for too long and is running out of room. He breathed through it. He looked at the street. Clint held the notebook out to him. Before Arlo took it back, Clint put 2 fingers lightly on the cover. Not grabbing it, just resting there for a second. "You were a teacher," he said. "You spent years knowing how to reach people, how to find the right words for someone who needed them." He lifted his fingers and let Arlo take the notebook. "You've got more to say than most people I've ever sat next to in my life. That is not a small thing. That is not close to nothing." Arlo held the notebook in both hands. His thumbs moved across the wrinkled cover, the way they always did when he was thinking hard about something. He did not speak. At the corner, Officer Rush had moved forward without realizing it. She was maybe 30 feet away now, close enough to hear the last part clearly. She had her right hand pressed flat against her mouth, and she was staring at the 2 men on the sidewalk with the look of someone watching something they know they will never completely find words for. Her partner, Officer Fold, looked at her. He did not say anything. He had stopped saying anything several minutes ago. He was just watching too. When then Clint Eastwood put his hand on his knee and pushed himself up from the sidewalk. He rose slowly, the way tall old trees move in wind. Not weak, just deliberate. He stood and took a breath and straightened his jacket. He reached into his pocket. This is the moment in every story like this where the famous person takes out their wallet, where they hand over a $100 bill, or maybe several, where the homeless person looks at the money with eyes full of tears, and the famous person smiles and walks away, and everyone who hears the story later nods and says, "What a good person," and then forgets about it by dinner time. That is not what happened. Clint Eastwood's hand came out of his pocket. He was holding his phone. He held it out to Arlo, steady, unhurried. Hawaii, like the offer had been decided long before this moment, and he was only now delivering it. "Call your daughter," he said. Arlo stared at the phone. "Right now," Clint said. Not loud, not hard, but with the full weight of a person who means every syllable of what they are saying and has not said a word they did not mean in a very long time. "Call her right now. I will wait right here." Officer Rush's hand dropped from her mouth. She forgot for just a moment that she was on duty. She forgot the radio on her shoulder and the notepad in her pocket and the coffee that had gone cold in her partner's hand. She forgot all of it. She just stood there in the October light on Cannery Row and watched a trembling man reach out and take a phone from the steadiest hands she had ever seen. And Arlo Beckett looked at that phone the way a man looks at a door he has been standing outside of for 3 years, his hand raised to knock, never quite letting his knuckles fall. The phone was warm from Clint's pocket. That was the first thing Arlo noticed. Not the weight of it, not the screen, but the warmth. It felt alive in his palm in a way that surprised him, though he could not have explained why. His hand was shaking. He looked at it, his own hand, like it belonged to someone else. The knuckles were rough and reddened from cold mornings. The nails were clean because Arlo had always kept his nails clean. Even on the street, especially on the street. It was one of the small dignities he had held on to, the way a drowning man holds on to something that cannot actually save him, but keeps him facing upward. Clint had stepped back. Not far, 5 or 6 feet, but enough. He stood with his back 3/4 toward Arlo, his hands in his pockets, looking out at the end of the street where the bay glittered in the October light. He was not watching. He was giving the only kind of privacy you can give a person on an open sidewalk. He was turning away. Arlo held the phone. He knew Marisol's number by heart. He had known it by heart for 3 years. He had memorized it the same week he lost his own phone, stood in a library bathroom and said it to himself in the mirror 20 times until it was carved in, until he could not forget it any more than he could forget her name. He had dialed it 3 times in 3 years. The first 2 times he had pressed the red button before the first ring finished. His thumb had moved on its own, faster than his courage. The 3rd time the call had gone to voicemail. He had listened to her voice on the recording. Bright and quick and professional, the voice of a person who had built a life. And he had not left a message. He had sat on a bench outside the library for an hour afterward, feeling like a man who had run at a locked door and bounced off and was now just sitting on the ground looking at it. He looked at the phone. He thought about the letter in the back of the notebook. The one in fresh ink, the one that ended. I love you, Dad. He dialed. It rang once. He breathed. It rang twice. His jaw tightened. It rang 3 times. The shaking in his hand moved up into his arm. At the corner of the street, Officer Delia Rush had stopped breathing entirely. She did not know she had stopped. She would not realize it until she let the breath out. The ringing stopped. A voice said, "Hello." Young, clear, a little cautious the way people are cautious when an unknown number calls. But underneath the caution, there was something warm. There was always warmth in Marisol's voice, even when she was being careful. He had known that since she was 3 years old. Marisol, his voice came out rough, like something that had been sitting unused for too long. He cleared his throat. He tried again. It's Dad. Silence. Not the click and drop of a hang-up. Just silence. Clean and open and still. He could hear her breathing, slow and then not so slow. Like she had just stood up from something and needed a moment to steady herself. He pressed on. He had learned in those 3 years that if you waited too long in a silence, you would fill it with fear, and fear would fill it with all the wrong things. Marisol, I know I don't have any right to call you out of nowhere like this. I know that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I have one thing I need to say, and after I say it, you can hang up, and I won't call again unless you want me to. That's a promise. You control it from here. A pause, very small. Then, in a voice that was trying to stay level and almost making it, okay, just that one word. But she had not hung up. She had said okay. To Arlo in that moment, those 2 syllables were the bravest thing he had ever heard. He breathed in through his nose. He looked at the notebook in his left hand. He did not open it. He did not need to. He had written the words so many times they were part of him now. None of it was your fault, he said. Everything that fell apart, the job, the house, me, none of it was because of you. Not one piece of it. I've been afraid you thought it was. I've been afraid that somewhere in there you were carrying that, thinking that if you had done something different or been different or needed less, that maybe it would have gone another way. He stopped. His voice was thinning at the edges. He steadied it. It wouldn't have. It was never about you. You were always the part that was right, the only part. The silence on the other end had changed. It was not waiting anymore. It was the silence of someone who has been holding a breath for a very long time and has just been told they are allowed to let it go. It was the silence just before something gives way. I'm still in Monterey, Arlo said. Things are not great for me right now, but I want you to know I'm okay. I'm safe. He had not said those words to anyone in 3 years. Safe. They felt strange in his mouth, but they felt true enough. He was sitting on a sidewalk in the October sun with a warm phone in his hand. That was more than most days. I mostly just wanted to hear your voice, and I wanted you to hear mine, and to know that there is not a single day, not one, that goes by when I am not proud of you. Whatever you have built without me, whatever you have become, I am proud of all of it. He stopped talking. He listened. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of her breathing and the distant sound of the bay and a gull somewhere overhead and the muffled noise of the city moving around them. Then Marisol Beckett, 26 years old, pediatric nurse, daughter, the girl who used to braid wildflowers into her hair on Sunday mornings, made a sound. It started low in her chest. It came up slowly and broke apart in her throat into something that was not quite a word and not quite a cry, but lived right in the space between them, in the country between relief and grief, where people go when something they had given up on suddenly comes back. Dad, she said, just his name, just that one small word. But the way she said it, the way it caught and broke in the middle, like a twig underfoot, like a wave hitting a rock, like something that had been waiting 3 years for the right moment to come fully apart. That one word held every month, every Sunday she had picked up her phone and set it back down. Every time she had passed a 4th grade classroom and looked in through the window for just a second longer than she needed to. Every letter she had written and not sent, because apparently she had been doing that too. They talked for 17 minutes. The minutes were not smooth or easy. They were not a movie version of a reunion where everything lands perfectly and both people find exactly the right thing to say at exactly the right moment. There were long pauses. There were sentences that started one way and ended another. Icon. There were 2 moments where Arlo said something and immediately knew it had not come out right and had to circle back and try again with different words. There was one moment where Marisol went quiet for so long that he thought the call had dropped, and he said her name, and she said, I'm here, sorry, I'm here. But the call was real. It was honest. It was not performed for anyone. It was 2 people, a father and a daughter, finding again the specific sound of each other's voices after a silence so long it had started to feel permanent. Permanent things, when they end, feel like waking up. Near the end, Marisol said, Can I call you back on this number? Arlo looked at the phone. Then he looked up at Clint Eastwood, who had not moved from his spot 6 feet away, still facing the bay, still patient, still there. The way a person stays when they have decided to stay and mean it. Not this number, Arlo said, but I am going to find a way to get you a number. Soon, I promise you. Okay, she said. Her voice had settled now, the way water settles after something large has moved through it, calmer on the surface, but changed underneath. Okay, Dad. A pause, barely a breath long. Dad? Yeah. I'm glad you called. He pressed his lips together. His eyes were closed. He pressed his fist lightly against his mouth and held it there for a second. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet. Me too, sweetheart, he said. Me too. He hung up. He sat with the phone in both hands, face down against his knees, his eyes still closed, his whole body doing something he could not control. A fine, deep trembling that had nothing to do with cold and everything to do with something that had been locked up for 3 years and had finally, in the space of 17 unplanned minutes, found its way out. He heard footsteps, slow and deliberate. Clint sat back down beside him on the sidewalk. He did not speak. He did not put a hand on Arlo's shoulder. He did not do any of the things people do when they want to be seen doing something kind. He just sat there, close enough that Arlo knew he was not alone, far enough that Arlo had room to feel what he was feeling. They sat like that for a little while. Then Arlo opened his eyes. They were red along the edges. He looked out at the street. A boy on a scooter wobbled past. A couple holding takeout bags walked by arguing about something cheerful. The world had kept moving. The way it always did, completely indifferent to the size of what had just happened on this small piece of sidewalk. Arlo turned to Clint. Thank you, he said. It was the same thing he always said, the way his mother had taught him to say it, clearly, because he meant it. Clint looked at him. She's glad you called. Yeah, Arlo said. His voice was still rough at the edges, but steadier now. She is. At the corner, Officer Rush had turned away. She was looking at the wall of the building beside her, as if it was the most interesting wall she had ever seen. Her partner, Officer Fold, was looking at the sidewalk between his shoes. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. There are moments that belong only to the people inside them. And then there are moments so large they spill over their edges and land on everyone nearby, whether those people were invited or not. This was the second kind, and it was not over yet, because Clint Eastwood was still sitting on the sidewalk, and his hand was moving toward his jacket pocket again. And what he was about to take out of it was not a phone this time. It was something smaller, something he had carried all morning, something he had written on before he left his house in Carmel, before the sun had fully come up, before he had walked to Cannery Row and sat down next to a man whose name he did not yet know. Something that was about to change everything. To understand what Clint Eastwood pulled from that pocket, you first need to understand what kind of man puts it there. Not the famous kind of understanding. Not the movies and the awards and the squinting into the desert sun. That is the outside of the man. That is what the world sees when it looks at a poster or a screen. The outside of a person is easy. It is the inside that takes time. Clint Eastwood was born in 1930 in San Francisco, the second year of the Great Depression, when half the country did not have enough to eat. His father moved the family from town to town, chasing work, gas stations, paper mills, Cold loading docks in the dark before sunrise. Clint pumped gas. He baled hay. He carried things. He learned before he was old enough to shave that the world did not owe a person comfort, and that a person who waited around for comfort was going to be waiting a very long time. He also learned something else. He learned that the men who had the least were often the ones who noticed the most. The men on the loading docks, the men who showed up before anyone else and left after everyone had gone, those men paid attention. They watched things carefully. They did not take what they had for granted because they remembered what it felt like to have nothing, and that memory kept them honest. Clint Eastwood had been keeping that memory his whole life. By the time he became famous, truly famous, the kind where strangers stop on the street and stare, he had already spent years doing things most people never knew about. Quietly, without a camera pointed at him, without a press release afterward. He had helped elderly residents in Carmel by the Sea hold on to their homes when property costs rose past what they could manage. He had funded scholarships for students in Monterey County whose families could not pay college fees. When the world shut down during the pandemic and the small restaurants along the coast were going dark one by one, he had made phone calls, personal calls, his own voice, not an assistant's, to owners he knew and some he didn't, asking what they needed and then making sure they got it. None of it made the news. He had not wanted it to. He understood something that not everyone understands. A good thing done to be seen is not quite the same thing as a good thing done. The seeing changes it, makes it partly about you. He did not want it to be about him. He wanted it to be about the person on the other end of the phone call, the person keeping the lights on in the restaurant, the student who could now afford one more year. He had also lost people. That was the other part of it, the part that gave the kindness its weight. He had watched people he loved slide slowly away from themselves, friends, people he had grown up with, people who had started out strong and steady, and then little by little, for reasons that were never simple, had come apart. He had reached for them and sometimes caught them and sometimes not. He had sat with the helplessness of not being able to catch someone you love. That feeling stays. It does not go away just because time passes. It sits in you and makes you pay attention differently from then on. So when he had walked past Arlo Beckett on Cannery Row month after month, on his morning walks, hands in pockets, moving at the pace of a man who has earned the right to take his time, he had noticed things. He had noticed the way Arlo sat, not slumped, straight-backed against the wall, like a man who was down but had not surrendered. He had noticed the notebook, the writing, the careful thank you every time a coin landed in the cup. He had noticed the books under Arlo's arm on the days he was walking to or from the library. He had not felt pity. That is important to say plainly. Pity is what you feel when you look down at someone. What Clint felt when he looked at Arlo Beckett was something level, something that looked across, not down. It was recognition. One person seeing in another person something they understood from the inside. And it was respect. Clean and simple. The kind you cannot fake. He had been thinking about Arlo for 3 weeks before this Tuesday morning, turning something over in his mind, and wondering whether to do a thing and how. Deciding, as he always decided, that the only move that made sense was a direct one. That morning, before the sun had cleared the hills above Carmel, he had called a woman named Petra Vasquez. Petra ran an organization called Second Landing, 15 blocks from Cannery Row. It found housing and job training and a real path forward for people who had hit the bottom. Veterans, former teachers, service workers, people whom the world had stopped making room for. It was not a large organization. It did not have a famous name. But it worked. Clint knew this because he had been one of its quiet, unnamed supporters for 11 years. He had never attended a gala for it. He had never been photographed giving a check. Swore he had wired money and made phone calls and trusted Petra to do what she did better than anyone he had ever seen. He had told Petra that a man named Arlo would be coming, former 4th grade teacher, sober 9 years, reads everything, has a notebook full of things worth reading, needs a bed and a beginning. She had said, send him. Then, before he left home, he had taken a small card from his desk. He had written 2 things on it: Petra's name and the address of Second Landing on one side, his own personal phone number on the other. He had folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. He had driven to Monterey and walked to Cannery Row and sat down on the sidewalk next to a man whose name he did not yet know. Now he knew. And everything he had found in that notebook, the 112 books, in the letters to Marisol written and crossed out and written again, the careful observations of light on water, the sketch of the businessman running from himself, confirmed what he had already suspected from a distance. Arlo Beckett was not broken. He was bent, the way a green branch bends under snow. Not snapped, just bowed low under a weight it was never meant to carry alone. Bending is not broken. Clint Eastwood had lived long enough to know the difference in his bones. He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the card. He held it out. "That's Petra Vasquez," he said. "She runs a program 15 blocks from here. Real housing, real job training, real path back to something." He paused just long enough to let the words settle. "She is expecting you." Arlo looked at the card, then slowly up at Clint. As something careful moved through his face. "She's expecting me," he said. "You called her this morning? Before you even knew my name?" "I knew enough," Clint said simply. "I told her a man named Arlo was coming, that he used to teach 4th grade, that he reads more than anyone I've come across in a long time." The corner of his mouth moved. "She said that was more than enough. She said she'd have a place for him." Arlo turned the card over in his fingers. On the back was a phone number written in a firm, clear hand. He looked at it. He looked up at Clint. "That's my number," Clint said. "Personal, so you have a way to call Marisol while you get settled, so she has a way to reach you, until you have your own." Nearby, Officer Rush had drifted a few feet closer without meaning to. She heard the words. She made a sound, barely anything, barely a breath catching, and pressed her hand flat against her collarbone. Her partner looked at her and said nothing. Arlo held the card in both hands. He looked at Petra's name. He looked at the number on the back. His thumb moved across the writing the way it moved across the cover of his notebook. Slowly, like he was making sure it was real. When he looked up, his voice had dropped to just above a whisper. "Why?" he said. Not suspicious, not disbelieving. Just a man asking an honest question because he genuinely could not find the answer on his own. "Why would you do all of this? For someone you don't know?" Clint Eastwood looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then he said the 8 words that Officer Rush would write down that night on a piece of paper she kept on her nightstand for years afterward. "Because it cost me nothing," he said, "and it might cost you everything if I don't." This is the part of the story the title promised you, the thing that left police speechless. You have read 5 chapters now, patient and steady, and you deserve to have it delivered. So here it is. But before it arrives, one small warning. It is not what most people expect. Most people, when they hear that something left police speechless, picture a crime or a crisis or something large and loud. Something that would make the evening news. Something with flashing lights. This was quieter than that, and it was bigger. Officer Delia Rush and Officer Terrence Fold stepped forward from the corner together. They moved slowly and carefully, the way you move towards something delicate that you do not want to disturb with the weight of your arrival. Officer Rush had her hat under her arm. She had taken it off without thinking about it, the way a person takes off a hat when they enter a place they want to show respect to. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Both men on the sidewalk looked up. She looked at Clint Eastwood first. She had met famous people twice before in her 4 years on the force. Both times had been unremarkable. Reports to take, boxes to check, the famous person uncomfortable and impatient and eager to be elsewhere. She had been professional both times. She was going to be professional now. She focused on keeping her voice even and her expression neutral, which was harder than it had ever been in her career. "Mr. Eastwood," she said, "I'm Officer Rush, Monterey PD. My partner and we were at the corner and we wanted to make sure everything here was all right." Clint looked up at her with eyes that had looked at cameras and courtrooms and hard weather and long roads and had not changed their quality through any of it. Calm, direct, not unfriendly, but not performing friendliness either, just present. "We're fine, officer," he said. "Thank you for checking." She nodded. She glanced at Arlo, who had the card in both hands, and was looking at it the way you look at something you are still deciding whether to believe in. His face was angled down. His jaw was tight with the effort of holding something steady inside himself. She looked at the two of them sitting together on the sidewalk, the most famous actor in American history, and a man with electrical tape on his shoulder and no laces in his boots. And she opened her mouth to say something routine, something professional, something that would end the interaction cleanly and let them all move on. That is when Clint said the thing. He had not planned to say it, or maybe he had. It was hard to know with him because he was the kind of person who thought carefully before acting and then acted without hesitation, which made all his decisions look both spontaneous and inevitable at the same time. He looked up at Officer Rush with that steady, level gaze and said, "This is my friend Arlo." He let those words sit for a beat, not rushing past them, not embarrassed by them, letting them mean exactly what they meant. "I wonder if I could ask you something." Officer Rush blinked once. "Of course," she said. "Arlo is going to walk to an address about 15 blocks from here this afternoon. There's a program there, housing, job training, a real way forward. He has the address." He glanced at the card in Arlo's hands. "I am wondering if you would be willing to walk there with him." The silence that dropped over the sidewalk in the next 3 seconds was unlike any silence Officer Rush had experienced in 4 years of police work. It was not the silence after a gunshot. It was not the silence after an accident. And it was a silence with a completely different texture. The texture of something unexpected arriving not with force but with gentleness, and the world needing a moment to make room for it. She stared at him. Clint held up one hand, just slightly, forestalling the obvious interpretation. "Not as an officer," he said. His voice was quiet and clear, the way a person speaks when they have thought precisely about every word they are about to use. "Not as any kind of official escort. He doesn't need that. He's not in any trouble, and he doesn't need supervision." He paused. "I'm asking because sometimes, when a person has been unseen for a long time, walking towards something important alone feels too much like walking toward nothing. It feels like more of the same, and I can't walk with him myself. I have somewhere I need to be." A very small pause. "I'd just feel better if he wasn't walking alone. If someone walked beside him as a neighbor. One person choosing to walk alongside another person. That's all I'm asking." Officer Delia Rush stood very still on the sidewalk on Cannery Row in her uniform, with her hat under her arm on a Tuesday in October, and felt something shift in her chest that she did not have a professional word for. She understood what was being asked. She understood it completely. He was not asking her to perform a duty. Duty was easy. Duty had a form and a protocol and a chain of command, and a box to check at the end of it. What he was asking was something that had no form and no protocol and no chain of command. He was asking her to take off the uniform. Not literally, sure, but in the way that mattered. And walk 15 blocks through Monterey as a human being who had decided that another human being should not have to make this particular walk alone. He was asking her to be a neighbor. She looked at Arlo. He still had not looked up at her. He was holding the card against his chest now, both hands wrapped around it, the way a person holds something they are afraid of losing. His shoulders were drawn in slightly. Not defeated, just careful. The posture of someone who had learned to take up as little space as the world required of him. She thought about her father. She thought about all the evenings he had sat her down in front of a movie, about a man on a porch in Detroit who looked past what people were and tried to see who they were. She thought about how many times she had watched that movie. She thought about why she had become a police officer in the first place, the reason she had told herself on the first day, the reason she sometimes forgot on the hard days, the reason she was being asked right now to remember. She breathed in once, steadily. "I'd be honored," she said. Clint looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he nodded. Once, slowly. The way he nodded at things that were true and sufficient. "Thank you," he said. She understood immediately that he meant it the same way Arlo meant thank you. Not as a reflex or a courtesy, as a real thing, given clearly, because he meant every word of it. He turned back to Arlo and got to his feet for the second time that morning. He rose from the sidewalk with the careful, unhurried steadiness of a very old man who was also somehow still very strong. He stood and straightened and looked at Arlo, who was now looking up at him. "You've got the card," Clint said. "I've got the card," Arlo said. "You'll call Marisol again tonight." "I'll call her tonight," Arlo said. Not a question, a promise. Good. A beat. One more moment of the two of them looking at each other on the sidewalk, where they had sat together for the better part of an October morning. Two men. One with everything the world said a person should have. One with almost nothing the world said a person needed. Both of them, in this moment, exactly equal. Both of them exactly present. Clint Eastwood extended his right hand. Arlo Beckett reached up and shook it. Then Clint turned and walked away up Cannery Row, hands in his jacket pockets, back straight, not hurrying, not looking back. And he walked the way a person walks when they have done a thing completely and have no need to check on it again. He passed a group of tourists who glanced at him and glanced away, and then glanced back with that slow, uncertain recognition that famous people in ordinary settings tend to produce. He walked on past all of them without pausing, without turning. He got smaller in the distance, and then he turned a corner, and then he was gone. Officer Rush watched until the corner was empty. Beside her, Officer Fold was looking very carefully at the ground between his shoes. His face was doing things he was working hard to control and not quite managing. She looked down at Arlo. He was still sitting on the sidewalk. The card was in his hand. His head was bowed over it. He was very still. "You ready?" she said, gently. The way her mother used to say it, not pressuring, just offering. He looked up. He was 54 years old. His army jacket had tape on the shoulder, and his boots had no laces, and his hair was the color of ash, and his eyes were still red around the edges from crying on a sidewalk in front of a stranger who had not looked away. He looked more alive than anyone Officer Rush had laid eyes on in a week, maybe longer. "Yeah," he said, and then quietly, like he was testing the word to see if it was true. "Yeah, I think I am." He put the card in his left breast pocket, close to his chest. He tucked the notebook in beside it. He pressed his hand flat over the outside of his coat for just a second, feeling the shape of both things through the fabric. Then he got up, slowly. The ground took more from him than it took from Clint. 3 years of cold mornings lived in his knees. But he got up, all the way up, straight. And Officer Delia Rush, 29 years old, 4 years on the force, daughter of a man who had watched Gran Torino 11 times and cried at the end of it each time, fell into step beside him. Not as a police officer walking a person of interest. Not as a city employee performing a welfare check. As a neighbor. One person choosing to walk alongside another. The way Clint had asked. The way it had always been the most natural thing in the world, before the world got complicated and forgot. They walked 15 blocks through the streets of Monterey in the October afternoon light. That night, Officer Rush sat at her desk at the station and opened her report form on the screen. She stared at the blank fields. She thought about the sidewalk, the notebook, the phone pressed to Arlo's ear, the handshake, Clint's back growing smaller up the street, Arlo's hand over his breast pocket. She started typing. She deleted it. She typed again. She did this 7 times. In the end, all she wrote was, "Today I saw something I will never forget for the rest of my life." She submitted it. She sat back. She looked at the ceiling. She meant it. Every single word. Exactly. The building did not look like much from the outside. It sat between a laundromat and a tax office on a side street off Lighthouse Avenue. A low, wide single-story building with a green-painted door and a small sign beside it that said, "Second Landing" in plain black letters. No pictures, no slogans, no inspirational words underneath. Just the name, and below it a street number, and that was all. It was the kind of sign that said, "We are not here to impress you. We are here to work." Officer Rush pushed the door open and held it. Arlo stepped through. The inside was clean and warm, and smelled like coffee and something baking in a kitchen somewhere at the back. The walls of the main room were painted a calm, muted yellow. Not bright, not harsh, just warm. The kind of yellow that feels like afternoon light. Along both walls hung photographs in simple frames, dozens of them, all different sizes. Arlo stopped just inside the door. He looked at the photographs, and they were pictures of people. Men and women of all ages, at different moments in their lives. Some of the pictures were clearly taken here, in this room, or in a hallway, or outside the green door. Others had been taken elsewhere, at a kitchen counter, at a desk, outside a school, in what looked like a small garden. In every single photograph, the person was looking at the camera. And in every single photograph, the person was smiling. Not the kind of smile you put on when someone says cheese. Not the smile of a person performing happiness for an audience. These were the other kind. The kind that comes from somewhere real. The kind that knows something the rest of the world does not yet know about that person and is quietly glad about it. Arlo stood and looked at them for a long moment. Officer Rush stood beside him and looked too. Neither of them spoke. The photographs did not need any help. "You must be Arlo." The voice came from a hallway to the left. It was warm and direct and a little brisk. The voice of a person who has a great deal to do and does it gladly but does not waste motion. Petra Vasquez was 61 years old and barely 5 feet 3 inches tall. Her hair was dark and silver-streaked, pulled back from her face in a bun that was beginning to come loose at the sides, which she seemed not to have noticed or not to care about. Her reading glasses were sitting on top of her head, which was almost certainly not where she thought they were. She wore a dark blue cardigan over a collared shirt, and she walked the way people walk when they have spent 30 years moving efficiently through rooms that needed things done in them. She came straight to Arlo, not to Officer Rush first, not to the room in general, to Arlo specifically, the way you go directly to the person you have been expecting. She held out her hand. He shook it. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I'm Arlo." She looked at his face the way she had looked at 1,000 faces in this building over 8 years, not at his coat with its taped shoulder, not at his bootless laces or his ash-gray hair or the redness still sitting at the edges of his eyes. She looked at his face, at the intelligence that lived there and had nowhere to go right now, at the carefulness. Oh, at the steadiness of a person who had been through something long and hard and had not stopped being themselves on the other side of it. She had seen that particular combination before. In her experience, it was the most promising thing a face could show her. Not cheerfulness, not eagerness, not gratitude, just that quiet, tired, undefeated intelligence. The ones who had that were the ones who came back from the furthest away. "I'm Petra," she said. "Clint told me about you this morning. He said you were a reader." "Yes, ma'am." "He also said you kept a notebook with observations about light on the water." A pause. "I thought that was a good sign." Arlo looked at her. He was not sure what to say to that. He settled on the truth. "I've been doing it 3 years." "Good." She turned slightly. "Let me show you around." It won't take long. The place is not large. That's by design. Small means everyone knows everyone. Small means nobody falls through a crack. She led him through the main room first, a long table with chairs where people ate together in the evenings, a corner with 2 computers and a printer and a stack of folders on the edge of the desk, job listings, resume templates, contact sheets for employers in the area who had hired from Second Landing before. A small kitchen off to the right where an older man in a gray sweater was washing a mug and nodded at them as they passed. Then the bulletin board. It was covered so densely with papers and cards and printed photographs that the cork behind it was barely visible. Arlo slowed down as he passed it. Job offers. Thank you notes written on folded paper and pinned flat. A hand-drawn card that said, "Petra, you changed everything," in large uneven letters, the way a child writes, or a person who had not written much before and was still finding out how much force to put behind a pen. Petra did not pause at the bulletin board. She had seen it 10,000 times, but she noticed Arlo slow down, and she was glad. The people who slowed down at the bulletin board were the ones who understood what this place was. The ones who walked past it without looking were harder to reach. She took him down the hallway. There were 6 doors, each one closed, each one with a small dry erase board beside it at shoulder height, blank for now, for residents to write their names if they chose to. "These are the rooms," Petra said. "Nothing fancy. A bed, a desk, a window, a lock on the door. Separate yours while you are here." Arlo looked at the row of closed doors, at the small blank boards beside them, at the lock on the nearest door, a simple one, the kind you push a button on from the inside. Private. His. "How long can I stay?" he asked. His voice was careful. He had asked questions carefully for 3 years because questions that hoped too much were dangerous. Petra stopped walking and turned to face him fully. This was a question she had answered many times. She always stopped moving to answer it because it deserved that. "As long as it takes," she said. "We are not a 30-day program. We do not have a clock running. We are not counting boxes or meeting targets." Her voice was matter-of-fact, not warm in a sentimental way. Warm in the way that solid things are warm, reliable things, things that will still be there tomorrow. "You are here to rebuild something that belongs entirely to you. That is different for every person. It takes as long as it takes, and not one day less." Arlo stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the hallway. He put his right hand out and rested it flat against the wall. Not gripping, just touching it. The way you touch a thing when you need to know it is real. When you have been in places that turned out not to be real. When you are not yet sure you are allowed to believe in this one. The wall was solid. Warm from the heating inside the building. Real. "You okay?" Petra asked, quietly, without alarm. She had seen this moment before too, because she recognized it instantly. The moment a person arrives somewhere safe for the first time in a long time, and the body does not quite know what to do with that. The body has been braced for so long that safety feels strange, almost frightening, almost too large to fit inside. He nodded. He did not speak for a moment. Then, "I'm okay." And he was. Both things were true at once. That he was not okay in any of the small immediate ways, and that he was better than okay in the one large way that contained all the others. Both things sat in him at the same time, pressing against each other, almost too much to stand up under. Petra put her hand on his arm for just a second. Not a long time. She was not a person who lingered in moments. She believed in moving through them, not camping in them, and just long enough for the message to land. "I see you. You are here. This is real." Then she moved on, leading him further down the hall, past the last door, which was slightly ajar, and through it Arlo glimpsed what she had mentioned on the phone. A small room lined along 2 walls with wooden shelves. Books, real ones, spines facing out, hundreds of them. He paused at the doorway. Petra smiled without turning around because she had heard him stop. "Library," she said simply. "Told you." Back in the main room, Officer Rush had not moved from just inside the entrance. She had watched Petra lead Arlo down the hallway, and she had stood very still and let the room be what it was. She was good at that, at taking up only the space she needed and no more. Her radio crackled at her shoulder. A call. Fender Bender. 2 blocks north. She looked one more time down the hallway where Arlo had disappeared. The hallway was quiet. The building was warm. The photographs on the walls smiled their real smiles at no one in particular. She went to the front desk. A young man with round glasses looked up from a laptop. She took the notepad he offered and wrote her name and her direct number in clear block letters. She tore the sheet off and set it on the desk. "That's for Arlo Beckett," she said. "Please make sure he gets it. Tell him if he needs anything at all, he can use that number." The young man nodded. He looked at the paper with the quiet seriousness of someone who understood what they were being trusted with. She put her hat on. She walked out through the green door into the afternoon, and the sun had dropped lower while she was inside. The light was orange now, long and warm, the kind of late afternoon light that makes everything it touches look like it is worth looking at. It hit the laundromat window beside her and turned it gold. It caught the tops of the parked cars on the street and made them shine. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She thought about the 8 words, "Because it costs me nothing, and it might cost you everything if I don't." She thought about all the sidewalks in this city, all the stretches of wall that people sat against, all the cups on the pavement, all the faces she had walked past without stopping, all the notebooks she had never known about. She thought about what she would do differently tomorrow. She put her hand to her radio. She called in her location. She walked toward the fender bender. She walked a little differently than she had that morning. Not faster, not slower, just differently. Like something had been adjusted inside her that changed the angle at which she met the ground. Petra Vasquez had one rule about the front desk phone that she never bent. Every evening from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, that phone belonged to the residents. Not for organization business, not for intake calls or supply orders, or the dozen administrative things that pulled at her attention all day. From 6 to 8, the phone sat on the desk, and it was available for whoever needed it, one person at a time, and they could sit in the chair beside it for as long as their call required. It was not charity the way she saw it. Charity was giving a person a fish. This was something else. And this was the understanding that a person cut off from the people they loved was a person cut off from the reason to keep going. And keeping going was the whole point. Connection was not a comfort. It was the road, the actual road back, paved with the voices of the people who still mattered. At 6:15 on the evening of October 14th, Arlo Beckett lowered himself into the small wooden chair beside the front desk phone. The young man at the desk, whose name was Tomas, and who had been a resident himself 18 months ago, and now worked the evening shift with the calm competence of someone who had learned what really mattered and was glad to be near it, opened his laptop and looked at his screen with deliberate focus, giving Arlo the sidewalk version of privacy, looking away. Arlo picked up the phone. He dialed. One ring. The Marisol answered before the second one finished. That single fact, the speed of it, told him something. It told him she had been thinking about the afternoon call, that she had been close to her phone, that she had, maybe, been hoping. "Hi," she said, warm and careful both at once, not quite sure yet of the terrain but willing to walk out onto it. "Hi, sweetheart," he said. This time they talked for 40 minutes. It was not the same as the afternoon call. The afternoon call had been urgent and raw. A breach, a dam breaking, 3 years of held-back water finally finding its way through. This call was different. This call was what comes after the dam breaks, when the water has settled and you can begin to see the shape of the land beneath it. Easier, uneven in places, but easier. And the kind of conversation where two people are learning again how to simply talk, not confess, not apologize, not explain. Just talk, the way they used to, before. Marisol told him about her ward, the pediatric floor of Valley Medical, where she had worked for 2 years now. She said she had chosen it on purpose. She said that children, when they were sick and scared, did not pretend. They did not perform bravery or manage other people's feelings or say they were fine when they were not. They just were what they were, completely and without apology. She said that was the most honest thing she had ever been around, and that she needed honesty in the room with her every day. "You were always like that," Arlo said. "Even when you were small, you were the most honest person in whatever room you were in. You never pretended." She was quiet for a moment, then very quietly, "I used to be." He heard the weight in that. He did not press it. He let it sit where she had put it. Then he said, "You still are. I could hear it in the way you answered the phone today. Both times, you answered like a person who meant to." A pause, then a sound. Something between a laugh and a breath catching in the chest. "You sound like a teacher," she said. "I was a teacher." He looked at the wall across from the desk, where a corner of the bulletin board was visible through the open doorway of the main room. One of the thank you cards pinned there. He could not read it from here. "I still am, I think, just temporarily without a classroom." She laughed. He closed his eyes when he heard it. It was full and real and sudden, the way her laugh had always been, like a bird that had been sitting still and then simply decided, all at once, to take off. He had not heard that laugh in 3 years. It was exactly the same as he remembered. Exactly. Not one thing about it had changed. He pressed his free hand flat on the desk and held very still, the way you hold still when something rare is happening and you do not want to move in case it stops. He told her about Second Landing, about Petra, about the room with the window and the desk, about the library down the hall, the real books on the real shelves, more than 100 of them, and how he had stood in the doorway for a moment and felt something he could not entirely name. Something that had to do with all the books he had read at the library 14 blocks away, and the list in his notebook, and the understanding that his reading had not been wasted time. It had been preparation. He just had not known for what. "She has a library," he said. On the other end of the line, Marisol made a sound that was fond and exasperated and full of warmth all at once. The sound a person makes when someone they love does something that is completely predictable and completely dear. "Of course you noticed the library," she said. "It was the first thing I noticed," he said. "Of course it was, Dad." Dad, the word in her mouth, easy now, natural, not breaking in the middle the way it had that afternoon, not carrying the full 3 years in its 2 letters. Just the word. Just what it had always been. His name from her. She said she wanted to visit. Not soon, she said that clearly, because she was honest, and because they both needed time to let the new shape of things settle before adding more weight to it. But she wanted to. She said it the way you say something you have already decided, rather than something you are trying to talk yourself into. Certain, careful, real. "I would like that more than I know how to tell you," he said. When he set the phone back in its cradle, he sat still for a moment. Thomas was looking at his laptop screen with great concentration. Arlo appreciated that without saying so, the way he had learned to appreciate the small dignities that people offered without announcing them. He added it to the list. Today had a long list, the longest in 3 years. He walked down the hallway to his room. It was small, clean. The window on the far wall looked out onto the side street, and the street light outside made a soft orange rectangle on the floor. The bed had real sheets, white, tucked in at the corners. The desk was wooden, slightly uneven on one leg, the kind of desk that had been used by many people before him and had the marks to prove it. The lamp on the corner of the desk had a warm bulb in it, the kind that makes a room feel like evening is a good thing to be inside. He set his notebook on the desk. He set the card, Petra's address on one side, Clint's number on the other, beside it. He looked at both of them for a moment, 2 small objects on a wooden desk in a lamp-lit room, carrying between them more weight than things that small had any right to carry. He sat down. He looked out the window at the orange rectangle of light on the floor. He could not see the bay from here, but he could smell it. That deep, cold, salt smell that meant the ocean was close, that he was still in Monterey, that this was still the world he had been living in, just a different room of it, a warmer one, a room with a lock on the inside of the door. He heard, far out over the water, the long, low call of a foghorn. Once, then silence, then once more. He opened the notebook. He turned past the book list, past the light descriptions, past the sketches, past the 5 letters to Marisol, all of them, all the years of them, to the first fresh page at the back. He uncapped the pen Petra had given him, a plain blue ballpoint that wrote smoothly and without catching. He wrote the date at the top of the page, Wish October 14th. Then he wrote, "Today a stranger sat down next to me on a sidewalk. Not to hand me something, not to pity me, to see me, to actually look at my face and see a person there. I have been trying since this afternoon to find the right words for what that is worth. I do not have them yet. Maybe I will write toward them for a while and find them eventually. That is usually how it works. I have a room tonight. There is a window, there is a desk and a lamp and clean sheets on the bed, and a lock on the door that I control from the inside." Marisol laughed tonight. I heard it, all the way through the phone, across however many miles, completely unchanged from when she was 7 years old, and I read her something that surprised her, and she laughed before she could stop herself. I will never stop hearing that sound. I don't think I am supposed to. I think that is the point of it. He wrote until Thomas knocked softly on his door at 8 o'clock to let him know the building was going quiet for the night. He wrote until the lamp was the only light left on in the whole building. 7 months later. On a Tuesday evening in May, Arlo Beckett stood at the front of a room in the Monterey Public Library and looked at 12 people who were trying very hard not to look like they were afraid. He knew that room, not the physical room, though he knew that too, every table and window and water-stained ceiling tile of it, because this was his library, the one he had walked 14 blocks to every week for 3 years, the one where he had sat in the back corner and read 4 hours at a time. He knew the other room, where the one those 12 people were sitting inside, the one made of uncertainty and old embarrassment, and the particular loneliness of not being able to do something that the rest of the world seemed to find simple. He had lived in rooms like that. He knew what they needed. He wore a name tag on his shirt that said, Volunteer Literacy Instructor. The 12 people in front of him were adults learning to read. Some were in their 30s, some were older. One woman, Nora, was 68 and had managed her whole life on memory and cleverness and asking for help in ways that nobody noticed. 2 of the 12 were currently living without stable housing. They had walked over from the shelter 2 blocks away, and their workbooks were brand new and their pens were still in the plastic. They all had the same look. Workbooks open, shadowing eyes on him, waiting to find out whether this was worth trusting, whether he was going to be patient or impatient, whether he understood what it had cost them to walk through this door and sit down in this chair. He had worn that look himself. He knew what it meant. He knew exactly what it needed to hear first. The first thing I want you to know, he said, no preamble, no warm-up, just directly, is that you are not slow. You are not behind. There is no behind. You are right here in this room, and this room is exactly where you are supposed to be. That is all. That is the whole first lesson. He said it plainly. No performance in it, just the truth, delivered the way a good teacher delivers truth. Not loudly, not with drama, but with the full weight of someone who means every word and is not going anywhere. In the back row, a man named Curtis, large, quiet, 61 years old, who had driven a forklift for 30 years and had been laid off and then lost his apartment in the same month, and who had not told a single person in his life that he could not read well enough to fill out a job application, put his pen down on the table. He looked at the surface of the desk. He nodded once, very slightly, the way you nod when you receive something you have needed for a long time and did not know how to ask for. Arlo saw it. He moved on, the way good teachers move on, acknowledging without spotlighting, because spotlighting a tender moment is the fastest way to close it back up. Petra Vasquez had suggested the literacy program 3 weeks after Arlo arrived at Second Landing. You were a teacher, she had said, when in the matter-of-fact tone she used for things that were obvious. They need teachers. The library calls me every few months looking for volunteers. I keep telling them I'll find someone good. A pause. I found someone good. Within 2 weeks of starting, Arlo had known this was the thing, not a temporary thing to fill the hours. The thing. The reason to get up in the morning with his feet pointed toward something instead of just toward the next hour. He taught Tuesdays and Thursdays in the evenings and Saturday mornings, and on the days between he prepared for the days he taught. And on the evenings after class, he sat at his desk and wrote in the notebook about what had happened and what had worked and what he would try differently next time. He was not being paid yet. Petra was working on it, negotiating with the library administration for a part-time paid coordinator position that had his name on it in everything but the official paperwork. It was coming. He was not in a hurry. For the first time in 3 years, he could afford not to be in a hurry because he had a room and a shelf of books and a phone in his pocket, and a Tuesday evening he was walking toward every week. He had a phone now, his own, a small prepaid one that fit in his shirt pocket, and his number was in Marisol's contacts under Dad. He was in her contacts. He had looked at that the first time she showed him the screen. Just the word, plain and certain. Dad, like it had never been anything else. Like it had always been right there where she could reach it. She had come to Monterey in February, on a cold Saturday morning when the fog was still sitting on the bay and the streets were quiet. They had met at a coffee shop called the Warming House, 3 blocks from the library, and they had sat across from each other at a small corner table. And for the first 10 minutes, it had been the way the first steps on fresh ice are. Careful, deliberate, testing each step before committing weight to it. And then something shifted. It always does if both people stay at the table long enough. One of them said something that surprised the other, and the other laughed. And after the first real laugh, the ice was just a floor again. They ordered a second coffee, then a third. They talked about her ward and his classes, and a book he was reading, and a patient she would never forget, and what Monterey looked like in winter fog, and whether the sea lions had gotten louder, or whether you just stopped noticing them after a while. They talked until the coffee shop began stacking chairs, and the woman behind the counter said, very politely, that they were closing. Arlo had looked up and found it was 5 in the afternoon. He had not noticed the hours passing. He had not noticed them passing in exactly the same way he had once not noticed them passing in a classroom, a long time ago, when a lesson caught fire and the bell surprised everyone. Marisol hugged him on the sidewalk outside. Both arms, no hesitation, her chin on his shoulder, her eyes closed. He had stood very still and held on with both hands and not moved until she moved first. It lasted a long time. He had no intention of being the one to end it. She came back in April. She was planning June already. There was one other thing Arlo did in those 7 months, and it was this. He wrote a letter to Clint Eastwood, not the unsent kind, the sent kind. A real letter, 3 pages, in the careful, small handwriting that had filled 4 notebooks by then. He mailed it to the address in Carmel by the sea that Petra had helped him find. He had used his own name on the return address, Arlo Beckett, Second Landing, Monterey, and he had sealed it and walked it to the post office himself and watched the clerk take it, which felt important, watching it leave his hands. The letter thanked Clint, but not in the way thank you letters usually go. Not the you saved my life kind of language that made everything feel large and cinematic and slightly unreal. Arlo was a teacher. He thanked Clint the way a teacher thanks someone, by showing him the specific, small, concrete things that had happened because of what he did. He wrote about Curtis in the back row. About the Tuesday evening, Curtis had looked up from his workbook with a new kind of expression. Not proud exactly. More like a man who had just found a door he thought was sealed and discovered it was not, and said, "I read that whole paragraph." Arlo wrote, "I sat in the chair next to him, not at the desk. You taught me that. The level thing. You made yourself level with me on that sidewalk, and I have never stopped thinking about why it worked. I do it every class now. I pull a chair up next to whoever is stuck, and I sit down at their height. They always relax. Something always opens. I think I understand it now. Being seen from the same level feels different than being looked at from above. It feels like company, and company is how people learn." He wrote about Marisol, about the warming house and the third coffee and 5 o'clock arriving like a surprise. He wrote about the notebook, how it had filled, how he had started a second one, how he kept the original sealed carefully in a plastic sleeve because the rain damage on the cover should not be allowed to spread. 3 weeks after he mailed it, a letter arrived at Second Landing addressed to Arlo Beckett. The handwriting on the envelope was strong and clear and slanted very slightly to the right, and to the handwriting of a person who has written many things by hand and means what they write. Inside was a single folded page, 4 lines. "Arlo, I received your letter. I read it twice. The part about Curtis in the chair next to him. I won't forget that. It belongs on the bulletin board at Second Landing. Keep going. The work is the work. C.E." Arlo read it 4 times. He folded it carefully. He pressed it flat between 2 pages of the new notebook, just behind the October 14th entry, so that the 2 things would always be near each other. The next Tuesday, he went to class. Curtis was in the back row, as always. That was the night Curtis read his daughter's text message out loud for the first time without asking for help. So his daughter had written, "Good morning, Dad. Hope or good love you." Curtis read it with his finger under each word, moving slowly, saying each one out loud. When he reached "love you," he stopped. He pressed his mouth closed. He looked at the ceiling for a long moment with the look of a man receiving something he had not let himself want for a very long time. Arlo sat in the chair beside him and looked at the ceiling too. He did not speak. He did not need to. He just sat there, at the same height, the same level, the way a person sits with someone when the moment is too large for words, and the only right thing to do is stay. Both of them knowing exactly what those 2 words weighed. Both of them knowing, though neither would have said it out loud, that they weighed everything. That "love you" at the end of a text message from a daughter could contain an entire life, could contain 3 years of silence and 1 phone call on a sidewalk and a card with an address and a woman named Petra and a shelf full of books and a lamp burning late into the night. Could contain all of it, just 2 words, but the right 2, at the right time. Everything weighs exactly as much as it needs to, no more, no less. Now we owe you something. The title made a promise. Something left police speechless. You have read 9 chapters. You have sat on the sidewalk with Arlo. You have held the notebook. You have heard the phone ring 3 times. You have watched a man walk away up a street without looking back. You have stood in Second Landing's hallway and felt the wall. You have heard a daughter laugh. And you may feel, by now, that the surprising thing has already been delivered. Clint Eastwood on a sidewalk. The card with his personal phone number. The word friend. The request to a police officer to walk not as an officer, but as a neighbor. The handshake. All of that is true. All of it happened. All of it left Officer Delia Rush sitting in front of a blank screen, deleting sentence after sentence, unable to find words large enough to hold what she had seen. But that is not the real cliffhanger. The real one has been sitting in this story from the very beginning, quiet and patient, waiting for the right page. Here it is. On the morning of October 14th, before Clint Eastwood laced up his brown leather boots and drove from Carmel to Monterey and walked to Cannery Row and sat down on the sidewalk next to Arlo Beckett, before any of that, he made a phone call. Not to Petra Vasquez. That call came second. The first call, made at 7 o'clock in the morning while the fog was still sitting on Carmel Bay and the house was quiet, went to a woman named Josephine Beckett. Josephine was 58 years old. She lived in Fresno, 200 miles inland, in the same house where she and Arlo had grown up. Their mother had left it to her. She had repainted the porch and replaced the roof and planted roses along the front fence, and lived inside it with the stubborn, loving ferocity of a person who believes that staying puts down roots, and that roots matter. She had not spoken to her brother Arlo in 4 years, not because she had given up on him, the opposite. She had spent 2 of those 4 years actively looking for him. She had called social service offices in 3 different counties. She had hired a private investigator for 6 weeks, right up to the moment the cost became more than she could manage. And then she had let him go and kept looking on her own, calling shelters, scanning the online rosters of county programs, asking anyone who had known Arlo whether they had heard anything. She had filed a missing person inquiry through the Fresno County Social Services Office in 2022. She had kept his old email address in her phone contacts even after she knew he had no device to read email on. Ashta, because removing his name from her phone felt like a door being shut that she was not willing to shut. She still prayed for him every morning, by name, out loud. She had no idea that a man named Grace, or rather a woman named Grace, who had worked as Clint Eastwood's personal assistant for 22 years and was quietly one of the most resourceful people in the county, had found Josephine's missing person inquiry 3 weeks earlier in early September, when Clint had come home from one of his morning walks along Cannery Row and mentioned, almost as an aside, a man he kept seeing on the sidewalk near the old fish market. A man who said thank you and kept a notebook and held himself with the particular dignity of someone who had not finished becoming who they were. Grace had not needed to be asked twice. She had found the inquiry. She had found the contact number attached to it. She had set it on Clint's desk on a folded piece of paper and said nothing else because she understood after 22 years how he worked. He had held that number for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of passing it on his desk in the morning and in the evening. 3 weeks of thinking about whether to call and when and how. Because here is the thing about reaching into someone else's life. Even with good intentions, even with the best intentions a person can carry, it is not a simple act. It is not a lever you can pull without consequences. A phone call from a stranger saying your missing brother is alive and safe can be the best moment of a person's year. Or it can break open something they have carefully learned to live around. But you cannot know which until you call, and you cannot uncall. So he had waited. He had sat with it the way he sat with everything important, patiently, without hurrying, turning it in his mind until he understood its weight from every angle. On the morning of October 14th, he decided the time had come. He picked up the phone and dialed Josephine Beckett's number at 7 a.m. She was sitting at her kitchen table in Fresno with her first cup of coffee and the morning light coming through the window over the sink. The window she had looked through every morning for 30 years and never stopped noticing. She answered on the third ring. "Hello? Good morning," he said. "My name is Clint Eastwood. I apologize for calling you without warning. I have something I want you to know. Ani and I thought you should hear it as soon as possible." The silence that followed on Josephine's end was the silence of a person whose brain is moving very quickly. "I know where your brother is," he said. "He is in Monterey, California. He is safe. He is sober. He is more himself than he may realize. And by tonight, he is going to have a real roof over his head and a real path in front of him." Josephine Beckett set her coffee cup down on the kitchen table. Very slowly, the way you set something down when your hands need to be free. She placed both palms flat on the tablecloth and looked at them and breathed once, very carefully. "How do you know my brother?" she said. And Clint Eastwood said, "I sat next to him on a sidewalk." Silence. Then, "I'm sorry, are you actually Clint Eastwood?" "I am." A pause. "The movie one." "I'm afraid so." Another pause. Longer this time. Then Josephine Beckett said, in a voice that was trying to hold several very large things at once, and doing its best, "Lord have mercy." He told her everything he knew and everything he planned. Petra Vasquez, Second Landing, the address. He told her that Arlo would be settled by that evening. He told her what he had seen in Arlo. The intelligence, the dignity, the notebook, the books, the thank yous that meant something. Because he understood that a sister who had been searching for her brother for 4 years deserved to know not just that he was alive, but who he still was. That he was still himself inside the difficulty. That the person she remembered had not disappeared. He told her one other thing. He told her to wait before calling. Not long, a few months. Let Arlo get his footing. Let him find Marisol first, because that wound was the oldest and the deepest, and it needed to begin healing before more love arrived at once. "He needs to feel strong again before he takes on more," Clint said. "Love is a lot to carry when a person has been carrying nothing. Give him time to build a shelf before you put more on it." "How will I know when?" Josephine asked. "You'll know," he said. "And when you call, just say his name. He'll do the rest." When he hung up, Josephine Beckett sat at her kitchen table for a long time. She looked at the morning light on the tablecloth. She looked at her hands. Then she got up and went to her desk and took out a piece of stationery and wrote a letter. Not to Arlo. Not yet. Just to herself. Just the things she needed to put somewhere outside of her chest so they would stop pressing so hard. She folded the letter. She put it in the drawer. She closed the drawer. She picked up her coffee. She went back to the window. She waited. The way she had always waited. Not passively, not with resignation, but with the active, deliberate patience of a woman who believed the thing she was waiting for was real and coming and worth every day it took. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning in January, cold and bright, with frost on the roses along the front fence, Josephine picked up her phone and dialed a number she had been given by Petra Vasquez, who had quietly passed it along with a simple message. "He's ready." Arlo's phone rang on the desk beside his bed at Second Landing. He was sitting at the desk reading. He looked at the number. He did not recognize it. He hesitated. Old reflex, the caution of someone who had been unreachable for years and was still learning that reachable was not a dangerous thing to be. He answered. "Arlo?" One word, his name, but the voice behind it, warm and round and carrying every year of a Fresno kitchen in a shared porch swing, and a mother who named her children well, was not a stranger's voice. It was the most familiar voice in his oldest memory. The voice that had called him home for dinner from the end of the street when he was 7 years old. The voice that had sat beside his hospital bed when he was 19. And the voice that had left the message he never returned 4 years ago, the last night of his old life. "Josie," he said. And Josephine Beckett, 200 miles away in the house where they had both grown up, sitting at the kitchen table in the morning light, exhaled a breath she had been holding for 4 years. "Hi, little brother," she said. He was sitting on the edge of his bed. The notebook was open on the desk behind him. Second volume, pages half full. The shelf of books was on the wall beside it. The window was open a crack, and the salt air was coming in off the bay. The same air, the same bay, the same Monterey, but a completely different room of it than the one he had been living in. He was crying. He did not turn away from it or try to stop it or apologize for it to the empty room. He just let it happen. The way you let rain happen because some things are weather, and you do not argue with weather. Because this is what a single act of genuine kindness does when it is given without an audience and without conditions and without a clock running on it. It does not stay in the place where it was given. It moves, it travels. It finds a sister in Fresno who has been praying at a kitchen table every morning for 4 years. It finds a daughter laughing in a coffee shop at 5 in the afternoon because she forgot to stop. It finds a police officer walking 15 blocks as a neighbor, walking a little differently on every street she works after that. It finds a man named Curtis reading 2 words to the ceiling with his finger still on the page. A good thing truly given, freely, completely, and without needing to be seen, does not stop moving. That evening, after the longest day of her career, Officer Delia Rush sat down at her desk at the station. She opened her report. She looked at the line she had written 7 times and deleted 7 times. She deleted it one last time. She wrote something new. She wrote, "Today I was reminded that this job is about people. Just people. That is all. That is everything." She submitted it and went home. The next morning, Chief Harold Bunce read it at his desk with his first coffee. He read it once. He set the coffee down. He read it again. He sat for a moment with one hand placed quietly over his eyes. Then he printed it out. He carried it to the break room. He pinned it to the center of the board, right where everyone could see it when they came in. It stayed there for a long time. Nobody took it down. 2 years after October 14th, Arlo Beckett walked through the doors of the Monterey Public Library on a Tuesday evening, crossed the lobby, and turned left down the corridor he had walked down 400 times in 3 years as a visitor, and now walked down 3 times a week as something else entirely. He pushed open the door to his classroom. It was a good room. The library had given it to him properly 6 months ago. A real corner of the building with tall windows on 2 sides that let in the afternoon light in long, clean rectangles. New chairs arranged in a loose horseshoe, a whiteboard along the back wall that he filled and erased and filled again at every session. On the door at eye level was a small sign with his name on it. Arlo Beckett, Literacy Program Coordinator. He had stopped outside that sign for a moment the first morning it went up. Just one moment. Then he had gone inside and set up the chairs. There were 22 students now, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, Saturday mornings. Every seat filled. A waiting list that Tomas managed from the front desk at Second Landing because several of the students had come through the program there first. And Tomas, who had been a resident himself, who had sat where they sat and learned what they were learning, understood better than most why the list mattered and why nobody on it should wait longer than necessary. Arlo set his bag on the table and took out the notebook. It was his 4th. He had kept everyone. The original, black cardboard cover, wrinkled from rain. The corners gone soft with 3 years of being pressed against the same spot inside a coat. Was sealed carefully in a plastic sleeve on the shelf above his desk at Second Landing, so the damage on the cover would not spread further. The second and third notebooks stood beside it, their spines facing out, penciled dates on the outside of each one marking when he had started and when he had finished. He was halfway through the 4th. He still wrote about the light. That had never stopped, and he did not think it ever would. It was the first thing he had ever written in the original notebook, and it would probably be the last thing he wrote in whatever notebook came after the 4th. 3 days ago he had written, January 8th, fog this morning, the thick kind, the kind that makes the city go quiet. And like the world put on socks and decided to be gentle for a while. He had read it back and thought, yes, that is exactly right. That is what it was. He still kept the book list. He was on number 204. Marisol called on Sundays. She had moved to Monterey 6 months ago, a small apartment 3 blocks from Community Hospital, where she worked the pediatric ward on the same floor, where children told the truth about being afraid, and she loved them for it. On the first Sunday of every month, she and Arlo had dinner at a restaurant near the water. The table they always asked for was by the window that faced the bay. Sometimes Josephine drove down from Fresno and joined them. When she did, the table was a little louder and a little warmer, and Arlo always ended up being teased about something. His books, on his note-taking, the way he still looked at the sky too often. And he did not mind at all. He had missed being teased by his sister the way you miss something you did not know you were missing until it came back. On those evenings, the three of them sat together in the window light that came in at a low angle over the bay, the way it comes in October and November, and on the good evenings in January. The way that particular quality of coastal light comes only at that hour, and only at that latitude and nowhere else. Arlo always noticed it, the way it fell across the glasses on the table and broke into small rainbows on the white cloth. The way it found his sister's silver earrings and made them flash. The way it settled in his daughter's hair, like it was glad to be there. He always wrote it down that night, back in his room, sort of at the desk by the window. Because you never know when you begin noticing things, which detail is the one that will matter. You do not get to choose in advance which moment turns out to be the one that holds everything else together. So you write them all, everyone. The fog and the light and the laugh and the earrings and the rainbows on the tablecloth. You keep the list. You stay awake to the world even in the years when the world is not being kind about it. Especially then, especially in those years. That is when noticing matters most. A man sat on a sidewalk. A stranger sat down beside him. One of them had been famous for 60 years. The other had been invisible for 3. On that particular Tuesday morning in October, on that particular stretch of Cannery Row, with the bay at the end of the street going from gray to blue, and the tourists walking past, and the pigeons doing their deliberate listening walk across the concrete, in that moment, those 2 facts did not matter. The famous and the invisible sat at exactly the same height against the same brick wall, and talk the way 2 people talk when neither one of them is performing for the other. All that mattered was that one of them looked at the other, and really looked, directly, clearly, at the face, at the person inside the circumstances, not at the circumstances themselves. The way you look at someone when you have decided, before you know anything about them, that they are worth the full weight of your attention. And the one who was seen, after 3 years of being walked past, looked through, reduced to a cup on the pavement and a thank you that nobody was listening for, began slowly and imperfectly, and with a great deal of effort and more than a few nights of sitting on the edge of a bed in the dark, to come back. Not all at once, not cleanly, not in a straight line, but back, genuinely, irreversibly back. It is enough. It has always been enough. Just see each other. That is all there is, and it is everything. And that is the story of Arlo Beckett and the man who sat down beside him. One person chose to see another person clearly. That is all it took. And look at everything that moved because of it. Before you go, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. It could be anywhere in the world, and that is the whole point. Kindness does not belong to one place. It belongs to all of us. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think about someone you have been meaning to call, or a person you walked past without stopping, hit that like button right now. Every like tells us that stories like this one matter, and they do matter, more than ever. And if you believe that one small act of kindness can change the direction of a life, subscribe to this channel, because that is exactly what we are here for. Every single video, we find the stories that remind you what people are capable of when they choose to show up for each other. Subscribe so you never miss one. And finally, there is another story waiting for you on the screen right now. Click it, because the world has more Arlos in it than you know, and it has more Clints too. Go find them.